Joining us from Portland, Oregon, John Canzano from johncanzano.com. Is it cold there or are you bundled up?
Yeah, it's cold.
Jeez.
It's cold.
It's brought to you by Zeke's Pizza, homegrown in the Northwest. Follow him on social media.
Is it hot where you are? Is it hot?
No, but I mean, I've got a T-shirt on. I'm not
it's just a light. I got a T-shirt under. I mean, come on. I'm not like in a Russian hat or something. You know?
Can you get a Russian hat, please? John Canzano, BFT on social media. Bald Face Truth is the radio program down there in Portland on 7:50 to the game from 3 to 6. All right, let's lots to cover.
Start with the news.
Yeah, let's start with the news. What do we know? What's going on there with the Trailblazers?
Well, we've long speculated that Paul Allen's wishes were that his NBA and his NFL franchises would be sold, and that the proceeds would be used for philanthropy and to fund his passion projects. And there's been a lot of frustration, probably more so in Portland than Seattle, over the Blazers just sort of sitting in limbo. Like, how do you operate when there's not that institutional top-down stuff? So today, the Blazers confirming they are for sale. They have enlisted the help of a company that will help them liquidate the Blazers and sell the Blazers, obviously to the highest bidder. The timing is interesting. Comes the day after the NBA draft lottery. Were they waiting to see if they were going to get Cooper Flag before deciding what to do, or was this in motion weeks ago? Who knows? But the Blazers saying to this point that this only involves the Trailblazers. But I do think it creates the horizon for the Seattle Seahawks as well, who have a provision there where the city of Seattle, I believe, benefits if they're sold before a certain date. So I think the Blazers will go first, and then eventually the Seahawks will change hands. It was his wish, and I'm glad that Jody Allen's doing this. She's had this thing in a stranglehold for too long. Blazers didn't get Cooper Flag, but maybe they'll get Phil Knight. Who knows? It's
interesting how different the two cities, I think, look at the ownership group. That there's not much outrage up here in Seattle in terms of the Seahawks. She is considered to be engaged with the organization. Yeah, they are very mindful, is the PR department, to always include her in pictures from the NFL draft war room to signal that she's somehow an active owner. I don't know her. I don't know anything about her other than what GM John Schneider and then what the pictures I see to signal that she is, I guess, involved. But that's very different case down in Portland where they can't stand her.
Yeah,
I mean, they can't stand her at all, and they want her to sell. They did release a statement today, and just to read it, I'm just going to read the bottom of it. This news. It says the estate of Paul G. Allen today announced it has commenced a formal sales process for the Blazers NBA franchise. And then at the bottom, it just says, this news does not affect the Seattle Seahawks NFL franchise or the estate's 25% interest in the Seattle Sounders MLS, and neither is for sale. That's what they have said today. You mentioned Phil Knight. Is that the number one target name right now?
Well, the original offer that Phil Knight made, it wasn't just Phil Knight on his own. It was Dodgers minority investor Alan Smolinski, who's a real estate developer, who joined up with Phil Knight. And it's interesting, Puck. These two guys, have homes that are within a walking distance of each other in this really upscale resort in La Quinta, California. So
I'm sure that's nice.
Yeah, nice little. I'm sure a lot of business gets done in that development, right? So you've got Phil Knight out for a walk, you got Smolinski out for a walk, or maybe they're on golf carts and they're having a chat. They team up. They make this lowball offer months and months ago for the Blazers. And I think it was designed to kind of, see if Jody Allen, did she know what she was doing? Like, did she have a plan for this thing? And, I'm not sure if Phil Knight is a reality here. I mean, at his age, he is awfully interested in legacy. It could be a legacy play for him. I think there would be some concern among Blazer fans about the franchise being relocated if it was bought by the wrong ownership group. So Phil Knight may be in that mix in some form or fashion. But I don't expect the NBA owners are going to want to cannibalize their expansion cities, Vegas and Seattle. It's worst kept secret in basketball. But, if Vegas or Seattle are antsy right now, do they come in? Does somebody come in and try to buy the Blazers and make that move?
That's I just clicked, on the comments immediately when the Blazers sent that out. And it was just, that's like the first thing. Well, they're going to move them to Seattle. They're going to move them to Seattle. I think it's dumb. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But you know what? I have to pause and say never on anything, because it's just you don't know in this day and age. I never thought the Sonics would ever move to Oklahoma City. And I'll say this, I'm wearing a Sonic shirt today, if anyone can see. I will say this, and others don't share this opinion at all. I would never want that team because I live there, work there. I know what that team means to that city. And in good conscience, I can never, ever go, oh, let's just take the Blazers. Yeah, because it's their team. It's Portland's team. It's not our team. I would not feel right about that as a sports fan.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want the curse that comes with that franchise. You're supposed to have the 10th pick. You end up with the 11th pick. You draft a big man. We all know what's going to happen if they draft a 7-footer. Like, there's just a lot of baggage that goes with it if you're a Blazer fan. But the bigger thing is, the NBA owners would have to approve any move. And I have a hard time believing that Adam Silver would want to repeat one of the biggest sins. Probably the biggest sin of David Stern's tenure was having the Sonics be relocated out of Seattle to Oklahoma City. And Silver wants to undo that. I happened to be in Seattle the day Clay Bennett came after the purchase, came to Seattle, and he talked to all of the employees at the arena. I happened to be inside the arena. I think the Blazers were playing the Sonics. They must have been later that night. And I kind of listened to what he had to say, and he was like, oh, it's going to be great. Nothing's changing, all of that. And sure enough, we all knew that the Sonics were on the move. So I think there's a couple things here. Adam Silver wouldn't want to repeat the sins of David Stern if he's learned anything. Secondarily, the NBA owners are greedy. They're not going to want to give up what looks to be like $6 billion in expansion fees to cannibalize two viable markets that are expansion markets. They're not going to want to do that. They're going to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not getting my cut here. And Portland's it's got a great building. They've got a great relationship with the city. The city has bent over backwards to give them a favorable deal, even buying the arena in this last, transaction. So they absorb all the cost of the renovation. And so I think the Blazers have a favorable deal. They've got a viable market. There is a little bit of saturation happening with the WNBA and the possibility of MLB to PDX, but I still think the Blazers have a viable fan base, and there's no owner in the NBA that's going to go, hey, that's just not working. Let's let them move.
If it's, I have two more on this one. We can move on. If it's not Knight, who else has there been anyone else locally rumored?
No, but I mean, naturally, people are going to pivot towards the billionaires who are sitting out there that, may have an interest in picking up a toy. I mean,
so like you.
Yeah, right. Like, there's always been like, I've heard things about Jeff Bezos. I've heard things about Bill Gates or his wife, his ex-wife, being interested in the WNBA. Would they be interested in the NBA? Would the group that bought the WNBA team say, let's bundle this together? It's interesting.
Didn't we talk a while ago, or wasn't there something about Mackenzie Gore wanting to be like the first female owner?
Yes, we talked about it. I put it in print. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much traction there is to it now, so I'm hesitant to say like, hey, she's a candidate to buy this team. But what a move it would be for the NBA to, take a team like the Trailblazers and be like, hey, look, we're going to have the first majority owner in the NBA that is a woman. And, the other thing that's at play here is that there's just a lot of money out there that, we've seen these other teams, the valuations for the Phoenix Suns and others, that the Boston Celtics sale have driven the prices of these franchises to an astronomical level. So it's a good time to get out. The NBA's TV deal has been baked in. You're picking 11th. The fans are just fed up with the lack of leadership. And to in Jody's defense, I don't think she ever really loved the Blazers the way she loved and embraced the Seahawks. Like, the Seahawks are her hometown NFL team. She shows up there. You can tell she loves it. Her friends love it. The Blazers, I think she kind of viewed it always as Paul Allen's, her brother's toy. Oh, that's your little hobby that you picked up. Right. I don't know why you own that team. That's the feel that people in Portland have had about Jody Allen.
One thing that I think is causing some frustration, I can already tell up here in Seattle, or will cause frustration, is that, does this feel like, with the announcement of the sale today, is it another moving of the goalposts for the NBA? Is this going to be another thing where they're like, all right, we can't discuss expansion and now until we get the Blazers sale resolved, because that was the line about the Celtics.
Yeah.
First it was the TV deal, then it was the labor deal, then it was the TV deal, then it was, we've got to figure out the sale of the Celtics, and I wonder now if the league is going to do this again. We can't discuss expansion until we figure out who's going to buy the Blazers.
Yeah, and you probably have to wait to the NBA Finals to get Adam Silver to talk on the record about that, where he usually does. He kind of gives the State of the Union during the finals. So I'll be curious to see if there's any kind of news out of that area. But it's been lingering in the background for some time, and it just becomes, I think, a question for the NBA owners. Like, at what point are they ready to move on this? With the TV deal done, with the sale of these franchises done, the Blazers seemingly are last in line. And I do think there is a motivation among the owners to take care of each other before they move forward in expansion. But this is the final piece. You just don't have a precedent for a trustee owning a team or trying to operate a team. It's just been a bad look and a bad feel in Portland.
Do you share, or what do you think about those who feel the NBA has once again rigged the NBA draft lottery? That they went to the Mavericks and they said, hey, LeBron's aging. He's going to be done. The Lakers are a anchor franchise in this league. They always have a superstar. We need you to trade Luka to the Lakers. If you complete said deal, we will give you the #1 overall pick. Do you buy that?
I don't buy it, but I don't blame people for wondering, given that the league has some issues, right? The officiating for years was a charade. The drug enforcement policy, the drug program, it's a charade. The attendance figures are a charade. Like, you can't do those things and then hold a legitimate lottery and expect everybody to go, oh yeah, it's totally on the up and up. Especially when you see like the historical trend of players like Victor Wembanyama and LeBron ends up in his hometown city, and Patrick Ewing goes to the Knicks, and you look at just the history of the draft lottery, and the conspiracy theorists will have a field day with it. I don't blame people for wondering, but I want to believe that, like, this isn't like Ocean's 11, like they're pulling off the biggest heist right out in the middle of, like, in plain sight, with everybody skeptical, and we're all watching it happen and nobody can figure out how they did it. Like David Copperfield picked the combination. But people in Portland, Puck, I'll tell you this. It turned out Ben Golliver of the Washington Post reported that the final ping pong ball that was like a 7, if the number had been a 6 instead of a 7, Cooper Flagg goes to Portland. And so it's like, you're that close. No, you're not. But the two franchises that needed him the most, the Utah Jazz had the greatest probability. They can't get a free agent to come to Salt Lake City. Portland can't get a free agent. Those two franchises never seem to catch a break where they need it, like in the draft lottery.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it for those who subscribe to that conspiracy theory, yesterday it just added more fuel to it. I mean, you just dumped gallons of gasoline on top of that.
And Nico Harrison, the GM in Dallas, who's like, they're ready to run him out of town. Suddenly now the heat's off. He goes free. He's, he looks like, all right, everything worked out. He's karma now. But, there are things that happen in sports. Like, you saw the Washington baseball team playing that game. They're playing against a NAIA team, and the lights go out in the 6th inning, and the game's suspended. Mm-hmm. And you go, it's not that far-fetched to believe, like, somebody maybe wandered down and turned the lights off.
Well,
not that far-fetched.
There are WSU fans that have started a GoFundMe page.
But it may not, like, maybe it just happened. But I don't blame people for wondering. I also don't blame people for wondering about the draft lottery, because the ammo's there. Yeah.
Well, I 100% believe Pat Chun waddled his ass down there and turned the lights off. I guarantee it.
Well, like, it reminded me of Bull Durham when he said we need a rain out, and they went to the field and they put the sprinklers on. They got a rain out.
You asked me, I think this was last week. You somehow asked Softy, and Softy's a putz, but it was good. You wrote this story. It was the 5 most important figures. And you did Oregon, you did Oregon State, you did UW, WSU, Boise State, and Utah. And then I think you also did the Blazers, correct?
Yeah.
I found it very interesting. And we can start with Washington State. And I was thinking about it for a long time. And I think I came up with a pretty good list. I do have regret of keeping, because you asked, well, who's some regrets that you left off? And so it was no particular order, or I can't remember if you made me put it in order, but I went with Jack Thompson.
Yeah.
I just think that he was the first superstar quarterback there. He was has carried the flag for that school, and he is instrumental. I mean, he's the godfather of that program.
Yeah.
And all those quarterbacks come back, and he's the one who brings them all together. They all have their issues and egos, but he's the one, I think, that links them all. And then I think Drew Bledsoe, because Drew Bledsoe he's a number 1 overall pick. He's gorgeous. He's got a powerful right arm. He's selling hock and wine. I think he's the most probably recognizable player that school's ever seen. Elson Floyd, just because I think what Elson Floyd did for that football program, because he recognized that he's probably the first and only president there that recognized, hey, if you have a good football team, like, people come to your school, like they'll arrive. And he was instrumental in getting facilities built, the stadium upgrades, and then, hiring Mike Leach. And then next on that list was Mike Leach. And I just think, he gave that program in a time that it needed. Coming off Paul Wolf, it was dead. That program was dead, and he revitalized it. And the last one was Bob Robertson, because Bob Robertson is, long time before he passed, long time radio voice of Cougar football, and he just, be a good sport, always was his signature catchphrase that he'd end every broadcast. And I don't know, so many people grew up, listening to him. That was mine. I regret I left Mike Price off. God, that was a tough one. Ryan Leaf, the one I had the hardest time, but I'm just trying to think of their time on the field.
Yeah.
Because I would have put him on it post playing was Steve Gleason, but that was the list.
You took some heat for that, because a lot of Washington State fans put Price in front of Leach. And I think it's a good debate because of what Price did at the time that he did versus what Leach did. I would argue they're both important figures. I talked to Jack Thompson yesterday. He's still involved, right? Like, so you have to you look at the span of his contribution. It's a guy who, probably could have ended up at Washington. Instead, he goes to Washington State. They blew his recruitment. He never forgave him for it. And he stuck it to him, and he becomes the number 3 pick in the NFL draft in 1979. And then he comes back, and people may forget, like, there was, remember when the Polynesian players were suing the school? There was all that uproar, and he is the one who came in and mitigated that. Mike Leach called him in and said, "Can you meet with the players, and how do we fix this?" And he got an apology for that meant something to the Polynesian players who stayed at Washington State.
Yeah. On your Oregon State list, I don't know how TJ Hushmanzada doesn't make it.
I know. But you got Chad Johnson. You've got Erickson and Riley. You have to have Dennis Erickson and Mike Riley, either one or two.
Yeah.
There are historical figures like the great Pumpkin DeAndros, but he didn't win enough, even though they had the giant killers. I just think there weren't a lot of winners at Oregon State coaching wise when you look at their history. And so Mike Riley and Dennis Erickson jump out. And I put Bob DeCarolis, the former AD, on that list because of the fact that he was the one, kind of like to your point about the Washington State AD, saw the value of football, knew he had a winner in Dennis Erickson and then Mike Riley, and said, we need to invest. And he just started shoveling coal. And I can remember a donor telling me, like a university employee telling me, that during the Dennis Erickson season where they go to the Fiesta Bowl, a helicopter landed on the football field, and it was a donor showing up to give Oregon State a check. Like, they had never had that happen. And so, like, when you have money dropping out of the sky, you got to give credit to the AD and the coach who were engineering that.
The Oregon list was Marcus Mariota, Mike Bellotti, Rich Brooks, Chip Kelly, and Phil Knight. It really just should be Phil Knight, Phil Knight, Phil Knight, Phil Knight, Phil Knight. But what was the feedback from Duck fans? And I understand Mariota because he won the Heisman instead of maybe Joey Harrington.
I think, Joey was a product of Phil Knight, right? And Nike and the billboard in New York City. Joey was a good player. Joey, was this close to going to Stanford, right? And he would have been a good player anywhere he went. But Marcus Mariota is the only Heisman Trophy winner in program history. He played in that era of Chip Kelly that elevated the program to another stratosphere. I think the Joey Harrington versus Marcus Mariota debate is the same as like maybe saying Mike Bellotti against Chip Kelly or Rich Brooks against Chip Kelly. One of those guys was foundational. One of them really just put, kerosene on it, and man, did it go. And so, yes, you could put Phil Knight all five. Without Phil Knight, Oregon's not Oregon. But for me, it was Phil Knight and then Chip Kelly. And then you start to talk about Mike Bellotti, Marcus Mariota, Rich Brooks. Certainly there are guys like Ahmad Rashad and Dan Fouts who are on that list. And Joey, I would include him as well. But I think if we're doing a top five most important, I think that it's those five.
Softy went with you contacted the hey pal. Did he respond by hey pal? Let me tell you what I got for five.
He wanted to know first of all if his name had to be on it, and then when I said yes, then he took it I think a little more seriously because he knew he was going to catch some grief. He was interesting because he came back to me with a knee jerk 5.
Yeah.
Then a couple hours later, he said, "Can I amend that?" And then later that night, he said, "Can I amend it again?" And so you get an idea of his workflow and how he thinks. Like he was considering it and reconsidering it, which I like.
The fact that he didn't have Hugh McElhaney even on his leftover list, putts. I think he's got Don. He put Don James.
Yeah.
He put Steve Entman, Warren Moon, Chris Peterson. I do find it interesting the Jim Owens because do you know the Jim Owens story? The background with the African American players.
Yeah. I know that part. Yeah,
I'm just curious about that one on the list. Now, listen, there's no argument what his record was as a coach. He was highly successful, but that did not end good for that school. Well, and there's some hard feelings for a lot of ex-players when it comes to Jim Owens. I mean, there's been talk of taking down his I think he has a statue. Talk of taking it down.
Jack Thompson, the throwing Samoan, yesterday told me Owens was the coach who scheduled a recruiting visit with him and then canceled it twice in the 11th hour. And for Jack, that was disrespectful because his father was coming with him. His father was coming, and twice his father had to change his work plans and his schedule to go on this recruiting visit to Washington. And then twice Owens canceled on him. And then Jack got in the room with Owens and basically said, "Hey, I think it was really disrespectful that you rescheduled twice, not for me, but for my father." And instead of going, "Hey, we're really sorry, we're trying to recruit," whatever, basically Owens told him to get out of his office. And so I think, if you are a Washington fan, you got to kind of think like he treated a player like Jack Thompson that way. How was he treating, some other guys?
Yeah. I think I think influential people in that program's history. Yeah. Hugh McElhaney's got to be on that list.
Yeah.
He has to be. And
that's the best part about these lists is that they're
great.
Yeah, it's like what era were you paying attention to?
Sure.
What do you value if you're an Oregon fan or a Washington fan? What, is it the 90s for Washington? Is it, the 2010s for Oregon? Like it really matters what your perspective is.
Yeah, it's very interesting. For the Blazers, you had it was Harry Glickman, Bill Walton, Clyde Drexler, Dr. Jam Ramsey, and Bill Schonley, the Schnoz. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's great. That's a good list. What do we got? What do we have any update at all on any media related deals? Well, we discussed that what they're gonna have on 25. Anything on 26? What do we know about expansion at all?
Yeah, look, I think the Pac-12 has got the mediation now scheduled for May 19th. Okay, so circle that on your calendar. Mountain West, Pac-12 are going to talk that day. They're going to, if they have a good session on the 19th, they will schedule more. If they don't, then it could get ugly after that. I had one source tell me that hey, it could get ugly. This could go to trial. Nobody wants to go to trial, but it could go to trial. So, but the threat here is twofold. The leverage that the Mountain West has is they know that they're holding the Pac-12 up a little bit. Pac-12 really can't announce their media deal until they figure out if their mediation is done because they lose some leverage if they do that. They can't move forward with expansion because they don't know how much money's changing hands. So the Pac-12 is a little bit in limbo, and you want to really be able to move forward by July 1 of this year, like this summer. July 1, they have to know because that gives you a year to onboard new schools. So the Pac-12 may have an idea of what they want to do, but they can't officially do it until they work through mediation or a settlement with the Mountain West. for the Mountain West, it really is about their viability and their financial outlook, because they have $61 million, that first burst of payments they're supposed to make to UNLV, Air Force, and their existing members. That has to take place on July 1 of 2026. So that's the same date that the Pac-12 has to have 8 full-time members. But the issue, I'm told from lawyers who deal with these kinds of settlements, is it takes more than a year to get like a trial and get paid. And so the Mountain West cannot afford to go to trial, Puck. If this goes to a trial, I don't think that the Mountain West has the money to keep UNLV and Air Force and everybody in the fold. I think they will default on that payment. Okay. And the Pac-12 knows that. And so I do wonder if there's been some dragging of the feet, especially on the Pac-12's end, because they can always just go and say, look, we'll just take Texas State for now just to be compliant. We'll announce our media deal. But I think ultimately there's a faction. I'm told there's a faction of Pac-12 schools, New World Pac-12 schools, that want UNLV. They want them in the fold. Yeah. There's another faction that wants to get into Texas. So I think those are the two most viable full-time member additions, Texas State, UNLV. I also think there's a chance if it's Texas State, it could be UTSA as a travel partner, but I'm not wild about that. And then for Memphis and Tulane and fans of those two schools, I'm hearing more and more resistance to Memphis and Tulane for an all sports membership from both sides, not just the Pac-12 side. They don't want to send their athletes out to the Mississippi to go play games. But I'm hearing that resistance also from sources at Memphis and Tulane who are going, I don't know if it makes sense for our athletes to go west either. So I think they're being rational. And I think, what I kind of see on the table potentially here is the addition of UNLV to get to 8. And then do you add Memphis and Tulane for football only or football and basketball? Now you're playing 9 or 10 school conference schedule for basketball, 10 for football. Maybe it's 9. And then potentially now, do you go after Texas State to get into Texas? You do that as a luxury, but I think that's where they're at right now. But I think May 19th becomes awful important. People in the Pac-12 are saying, don't oversell the idea that something's going to happen on May 20th. Right. But the idea here is that this settlement piece needs to get fixed. They're not just trying to settle the poaching penalty antitrust suit. They're also trying to settle the exit fees of the Mountain West schools that are leaving. So it could go into the night on May 19th. It could be a couple of days. But I think we're seeing that, the ultimate drop dead for the Pac-12 is kind of like July 1 of this summer. They got to have their ducks in a row.
What is there anything new on St. Mary's about joining the conference basketball only?
I'm just being told, from sources at St. Mary's that they continue to be told by the Pac-12 that once the football thing is done, Pac-12 will consider basketball. I still think St. Mary's is out there, but if you're dreaming here, like you want to have the 5th best conference in football, and you want to have a conference that arguably could be the number 4 conference in basketball, how good they are. But if you're just pipe dream here, if you're the Pac-12, UNLV makes sense. You get UNLV into the fold. It's a geographic win. Then you go Memphis, Tulane. Maybe you add St. Mary's. That's a hell of a basketball conference. And it's a football conference that has a gap between, the Pac-12 and the next group of 5 conference or group of 6 conference is akin to the gap between like the SEC and the ACC or the SEC and the Big 12. It is huge. It sort of ensures that your conference champion is getting that automatic berth to the playoff.
Last thing for you, they'll cut you loose. You just posted it about an hour ago, and I want you to I've skimmed it, but I want you to give me the details. We have another incident involving youth coaches getting out of hand. It appears to be at a 10 or an 11U. I think an 11U fast pitch game.
Just what I want to be covering. It's exactly what I want to be writing about and covering, but
what happened?
The adults here will not allow me to focus on what I need to focus on, because if we can't regulate ourselves, people, if the coaches can't coach in a rational, grounded manner, and the adults in the crowd can't stop punching each other at youth sports events, we can't move on. We can't go to step 2. So here's the issue. It's an 11 under tournament. It's taking place in Newberg, Oregon. You've got a team from St. Helens. You got a team from Astoria. Team from Astoria happens to have a young lady on the roster who's tall, and she's 5'10" and she's 11 years old. She plays volleyball. I looked on Facebook, quick check. Everybody in her family's tallish. Mom and dad are both tall. So this is a tall kid who steps up to the plate, and I'm sure people in the crowd are doing what they do at youth sports events, going, how old is that girl? And by the way, she's 11. Like, I'm sure she hears it in her day as she walks around, and people go, do you play basketball? Do you play volleyball?
And girls in particular, this, having raised girls in particular, very, what's the right word? Sensitive when it comes to height. It's not, because it's always, you're gawking at them. And
they're girls in general are nitpicked. We nitpick Correct. Girls, and there's, the studies will say that girls at about age 9 or 10 start to have anxiety. They start to have self-image issues. That's not coming from within them. If they were isolated in some, remote part of the world, that's coming from us. It's outside in pressure that they're getting. But she gets to the plate. She hits a one hopper towards the shortstop, who's playing kind of shallow, but she's kind of in the base path. She hits a one hopper, hits the kid in the shin. Obviously, the 10 or 11-year-old shortstop is hurt. The kid gets to first base. Coach for the St. Helens team, who was on defense, comes roaring out of the dugout, yelling, time, time, time. I posted the video at johncanzano.com if you want to see it. But he then demands to see her birth certificate. He said, there's no way that a 10-year-old, he says, could hit a ball that hard. And somebody in the crowd goes, you're right, she's 11. She's not 10. But he goes on and on. There happens to be a high school girl who is umpiring. She's behind the plate, doing the best she can in Newberg. You've got coach yelling. You've got a middle finger that comes out from the coach. You've got the game continues. Players at the end of the game refuse to shake hands with, the tall girl from Astoria. Parents are taking pictures of her because they want to be like, that's the girl. How tall is this girl? Let's go to social media. Like, it's just another reminder of how unhinged and the loss of civility that we have, and coaches losing their way. Public service coach, you may feel like you are the most important person in that stadium. You may feel like you have all this authority because, you've sent a kid off to get a scholarship here, or, you created a lot of all-star players, and you might even be in a full uniform if you're a youth baseball coach. But I'm here to tell you, you're more like a social worker. None of us mistake you for being a manager of a professional team. I don't care about what injury you suffered that caused you to not get the full ride D1 scholarship. I nod and we may humor you, but none of us parents are looking to you as like this expert that's going to get your kid to the next level. So just, if you have anything to say about an opposing player during a game, it should be limited to, hey, nice job. Way to hit the ball.
100%.
Back up your shortstop 2 steps if you think the hitter's too big and you think the ball's going to come off hot. Like, just be a reasonable, rational person. And flipping off parents, and the coaches have been suspended. I'm glad for that. But I'm just like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
I agree with you. It's the advice that you wrote at the end of the column that you got with, speaking of Bob DeCarolis, right? Yeah. The who was the AD at Oregon State. And you were asking about it. You were coaching soccer, and you're like, what should I do? And what conditioning drills and all this stuff. And he, as you wrote, he just nodded and listened, and then he offered you the advice and just said, your job is to make them want to come back the next day.
That's it.
It's so true. It's just have fun. How do you make, everybody wants to win, but how do you make it fun for them at that age to want to continue to play? Because if they don't have a good experience, then they don't want to come back and play anymore.
That game was not fun for anybody.
No.
And the 11-year-old, that poor kid, she ended up in tears. Her mom said she cried after the game. She was crying in the dugout,
Of course.
Why? Because she's tall. I mean, she's supposed to carry her birth certificate with her. And we all know, the coach who's making that accusation, if she produces a birth certificate, he's going to be like, it's a fake,
Sure.
We're in a time where I think politically, from a business standpoint, from professional sports, I go back like Enron, Bonds with the cream and the clear, Lance Armstrong, there was this deterioration of civility and rule following in our society that is a really interesting study. And it's just become fashionable to, forget the facts, just yell louder than the next person and everyone will believe you.
Listen, this is a political free show. This is a direct result of two things. It's social media and the political climate we've been in the last 8 years. That's the result of this lack of treating people with respect. Yeah. That's what it is. It is given this green light to act like absolute jackasses to everyone. It just, that's it. Top to, you learn it from the top and it trickles down to the bottom. That's just the reality. Yeah. And there is zero debate on that. It just is.
I'm like you. I don't like to bring the politics into it because I think that it just clouds the issue. But I do think it's interesting to kind of study it. And I don't care who's yelling on which side. Like, it's just people yelling at each other. It's just, there's a loss of civility. And it goes from, we used to whisper about it, right? We used to go, hey, is that kid, is that kid too old to be playing?
I did it the other day, but it was in a joking manner because I knew the kid. Yeah. But he's a 12-year-old that pitched against. He's enormous, John, and he throws 68 miles an hour. Now I want you played baseball.
Yeah.
What do you think 68 miles an hour is at 46 feet? I don't know. Mid-90s?
It's 6 miles an hour for every
you think about it,
you're away. So that's like 115.
And I know what it's, and I know that he's 12, but I joke about it, but I would,
But the thing is, we used to, like, I might turn to you at the game if we see this kid at the plate. I might go, wow, she's really tall. Yeah. I wonder how old she is. Yeah. Now we've gone from that to the coach bursting out of the dugout demanding a birth certificate. Like the leap there is the loss of civility. I think it's okay for people to go, gosh, Barry Bonds, he's looking like he's hitting home runs. He looks like he's a linebacker in the NFL, but not at a youth sports game. Come on. What are we doing?
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you for everything that you do. Right. Appreciate it. Great stuff every single week. And we'll look forward to next week's chat as always.
Thanks, Puck.